While many, including us, have pointed out that the gendered impacts of COVID, fewer have come up with specific action plans that can address these inequities. Women and gender diverse people, especially women of color, make up a majority of essential workers. They are putting their bodies at risk to serve society. At the same time, they are also the majority of people who have been furloughed from work in sectors that have shut down, with schools and daycares being closed. And because of the gender division labor at home, we risk losing a generation of women from the workforce and undoing 30 years of progress towards gender equality. Our view is that we won't get recovery unless we focus on equity. The plan, which all of you should have received as a link in your event reminder or is available at feministrecovery.ca, highlights 8 pillars for recovery. Those are intersectionality, understanding power in our society, addressing root causes of systemic racism, care work is essential work, investing in good jobs, fighting the shadow pandemic of gender-based violence, bolstering small businesses, strengthening infrastructure for recovery, and assuring diverse voices in decisions.
If we don't have our head and our heart aligned, it's hard to do the work with our feet, right? And a lot of the pieces, I think the reason why I respect all of the panelists' work is all 4 of you, I've watched your careers over many years, and you're just simply getting the work done. Again, you're not waiting for someone to come to you with funding. It's about finding that solution or finding a policy or a program or uplifting others to actually create some change. And specifically, what does concrete change look like? Because I'm sure for many of you on this Zoom call and also for the panelists, it must also be exhausting sort of talking over and over again and describing the oppression being foisted on our communities.
There will be some great employers out there that will respond to demands by women for greater accommodation, but we all understand that if the schools don't reopen and if childcare spaces are reduced in number and access and quality, there's only so much work you can do at home while you are taking care of kids. I am far more concerned about the number of women in the next few weeks that are going to throw in the towel. We have to get organized and we have to get vocal. What the YWCA of Canada did, along with the Institute for Gender and the Economy at the Rotman School of Business, is to pen a playbook of what you could do if you actually wanted to put flesh on the bones of what the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and all of our finance departments around the world have been saying, which is we need more inclusive growth. They don't tell you what the recipe is for that. They just use these terms. Well, your playbook actually shows what that would look like if you were actually going to deliver inclusive growth. And you cannot do it on a workplace by workplace basis. You cannot do it by being afraid that you're going to become invisible in the workplace. You know what's going to happen? We're going to set back gender equality by decades if we don't get collective action through public policy. Because women are just going to drop out. They can't do it, right? So like this to me is not a micro solution. The question is, how do I, at the micro level, MacGyver my way through this morass of public policy incompetence? But this is public policy incompetence. We need our governments to respond to a systemic problem. Like I said before, if you knew that 35% of your roads and bridges were at the risk of being washed out, you would know you're losing economic opportunity, you're losing business opportunity, you are losing GDP. They would have a plan. Where the hell is their plan for this? Because it's coming, we can see it. And you just can't knock out that number of women and expect the economy to tick along. We are talking about public policy incompetence that's going to generate an economic depression. Forget about individual problems of not being able to balance work and life. So it seems to me that what we need is more of what you have presented us, a playbook, and women getting angry and women getting organized and women pointing to what it needs to be done to lift all the boats up with this flood of disaster that has come to town. How do we actually all navigate this terrible flood that has that has befallen us? And it isn't about any individual becoming invisible. It's about a whole cadre of marginalized people becoming completely knocked out of the game. We can't afford this, and we need to act together.
If I was to give some advice or recommendations to the Canadian government at this time, I guess the two things that I would say would be seize the opportunity to partner directly with community, with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, recognizing their rights as sovereign nations. And I'm not sure that we've done a good job of that in that interface. Address those social and economic disparities, because these didn't happen when COVID-19 happened. They are deeply rooted and anchored in the history of this country. And I guess the final point I would make is to establish and implement a COVID-19 specific anti-stigma campaign.
If I were to ask for two specific issues or priorities that I'd like the government to keep in mind, I think one is actually thinking about extending CERB beyond just a response to a pandemic. If we know that $2,000 is the minimum bar that Canadians and folks on this land need and deserve to make their ends meet, I think that that is something that we should set as the standard for folks across this country. And then the second one is to work hand in hand with provinces to bolster local funding for 2S LGBTQ community services. The federal government has announced some significant funding in the last budget, and that is a big step forward. But at the end of the day, this has to be a shared responsibility across provinces, municipalities, and the feds. And again, 2S LGBTQ communities are really struggling during this pandemic and struggling just in general in the world that we live in these days. And so I think a targeted response to make sure these organizations have the funds that they need would be the best thing that we could see when I'm thinking about 2S LGBTQ communities in particular.
I think there's a real gap in terms of the interim solutions and injections of investments. They've really been focused on income support, which is great. But we know we're entering into a very long recovery period, and we already know that young people, marginalized groups in general, will have a longer recovery period. It's going to be extended. And so income supports are not sufficient. They're going to run out at some point. And there is a ton of work that's happening right across the country with young people. Work that's not being accounted for, work that's not being recognized, different types of interventions, different types of support. And I think what's missing is a way to make sure that we recognize that work, that we actually have a clear sense of the cost. We need to monetize that work and the support that's taking place, and find a longer term way to embed that in the existing ecosystem so we can continue to support it. It's going to require more than 6 months, more than 3 months. And so let's be clear about that. Let's acknowledge that and start working on what that needs to look like. And so I think that also kind of dovetails into what the priorities are. From a policy perspective, I think there's two pieces that kind of echo what's in your report. And it has to do with investments in care, and broader that definition of care, the caring economy, those who care for us, really broaden investments in care, and invest in good jobs. And take away this notion that it's okay for certain jobs to not be good jobs, because it's not. And I think the pandemic has really brought that to light, that it's not okay for those in the caring economy to be underpaid, underfunded, and under-resourced, because that has really cost us lives, really.